Hey, in this video, I will cover product labeling requirements in the UK. And perhaps the most natural starting point would be the UKCA mark. That is sort of as a follow-up or a replacement for the EU CE mark. At the current time, the UKCA mark essentially has the same function as the CE mark. And what it does is that it indicates compliance with the applicable UK regulations and reference standards within that regulation. So essentially, it demonstrates to a consumer or a potential retailer that this product is compliant with regulations that in turn require a UKCA mark. This means is that just like the CE mark, the UKCA mark is not a quality mark or a mark of approval in that sense, and it cannot be freely applied. The UKCA mark should only be applied if the product is covered by one or more UK regulations that in turn requires it. This means that you can already see the UKCA mark on electronics, protective equipment like helmets, toys, and so on. But again, you can't freely apply it. For the time being, the UKCA mark is, as far as I understand, mandatory for the products that previously required a CE mark. But this can diverge in the future. It may be that they will remove this UKCA mark requirement from some categories that previously required a CE mark, if that is not already the case. May also be a situation in the future where the UKCA mark is expanded to products that are not currently or previously required a CE mark, just so you are aware of this. There's no guarantee that the EU and the UK will walk in lockstep. Finally, I also want to mention that UKCA marking is usually not the only requirement in terms of labeling to take into consideration for the products that are covered by UKCA mark, but you also have to look into traceability labeling in almost all such cases. Traceability is referring to everything from producer or importer / manufacturer information, meaning your company details, but also batch numbers, SKU, article numbers, product names, and so on. You can find the details inside the regulations. What about the CE mark? So the CE mark was supposed to be phased out, I believe, in late December 2022. And I believe that in November, the UK government announced that this was to be postponed until what I believe is the latest decision, which is that the CE mark is to be valid until 31st of December of 2024. Many companies have already transitioned from the CE mark to the UKCA mark as they anticipated that the UKCA mark would become mandatory. Well, which it is, unless you have the CE mark. All right, let's move on then. So now we have textiles labeling requirements, which is referring to one of these care labels you can see here on the left. Textile products labeling and fiber composition regulation of 2012 states that you must specify the textile fiber. That could be 100% cotton, 98% polyester, 2% spandex, and you must use the terms that are mentioned in the regulation, that the terms that are accepted. And this does not only apply to clothing, just to be clear, but to products consisting of 80% or more by weight of textile fibers. That's also identical to the EU regulation or the EU directive. Next, we have toy warning labels. Toys are, as far as I'm aware, also covered by UKCA marking requirements, but it goes beyond that. And although warning labels are not unique to toys, you can find this section in the Toys Safety Regulations of 2011. A warning, instructions, or other information required to accompany a toy must be marked in English in a clearly visible, easily legible, understandable, and accurate manner on the toy, a label affixed to the toy, or the packaging. Now, What it also states is that any warning that is either printed on the toy or a label must also be preceded by the word warnings. So then the question is, where do you find information about the warning? What text should you be using? And that is something that you can in some cases find in the standards that are referenced or harmonized. At least harmonized is a term used in the EU. I'm not entirely sure if harmonized is a term used in the UK, or maybe it's referenced. But in any case, the reference to harmonized standards under this 2011 regulation, where you can likely find EN 71 and a variety of EN 71 parts. So you can find warning labels inside some of those, some that apply very broadly to toys as a product category, and also to more specific products like, say, trampolines and so on and so forth. But in some cases, you may not be able to rely on a pre-written warning text, if you understand what I mean. But that does not mean that the warning label is not required. So yeah, you may be able to find examples of text you can use as a warning text inside the EN 71 parts, but there's no guarantee, and you may have to come up with your own if that is necessary. That really depends on the risk, because ultimately that's what this is about. Now, keep in mind, before I go to the next slide, I also want to clarify that using warning labels, be it for toys and other products, it's not a substitute for non-compliance. You can't use warning labels instead of ensuring that your product is safe. It's not one or the other. It's not a shortcut. Just want to make that clear. Okay, now food contact materials. Now, food contact materials can refer to anything from kitchen appliances to cutlery, or, well, variety of kitchen equipment and even food packaging materials. Anything that's in contact with food or beverage. And this one is a bit unique, and you can find this in the Materials and Articles in Contact with Food, England Regulation 2012. And what it does is that it's, well, despite that, this is post-Brexit era for the UK, they do refer to Regulation 1935-2004, and this is a EU regulation. More specifically, it's the EU Food Contact Materials Framework Regulation. What we find in this English regulation is that no person may place on the market any material, etc., that do not comply with Article 15 and the various parts of Article 15. And again, this is referring to this EU regulation, the framework regulation. Let's look at what the framework regulations has to say about labeling. So this is Article 15 from the European Commission website. And what's interesting here is that it does mention the for food contact text or a symbol, which you can find in Annex 2. I'm not going to go into that much detail today. But in any case, if it is necessary, if it's not obvious that this is a food contact material, now you wouldn't need that on a fork, for example. But just to give you an idea, it may not always be obvious when it comes to certain kitchen appliances and so on. You also need to specify a trade name of the company, identification to ensure traceability of the material and article as described in Article 17. Again, this is all public information, so you can go and you can find this on the European Commission website, of course. But what traceability is usually referring to, that's a product name, serial number, batch number, and so on, so you can identify the product, the materials, if that's necessary, and also the batch that the product belongs to. So we'll see how this will develop in the future. It's possible at some point they will amend the existing, the UK regulation and implement this directly. But for the time being, they do point to the European Union Framework Regulation. Right, and finally we have the General Product Safety Regulations. And What's interesting about the GPSR in the UK is that it's just like the counterpart in the EU, the General Product Safety Directive, in the sense that it sort of serves as a catch-all. If a product is not covered by specific measures, specific regulations, specific standards under another regulation, that is, then you still have to ensure compliance with the broader provision of the general product safety regulations, meaning that they can be applied to essentially everything. And the reason I'm showing this high chair is not to hint that this is exclusively applicable to children's products, because it's not, but it's really to it's really to separate the toy safety regulations, which specifically applies to toys, from other children's products. But that said, the GPSR it still references or harmonizes standards that apply to furniture, that apply to fitness products, and so on and so forth. And it also makes it clear that even if it does not mention your product, if it doesn't cover a standard that is in any way related to your product, you still have to do your utmost to ensure that your product is designed for safety and verified to be as such. So anyway, what does this mean for labeling requirements? What it does mean is that even if your product is not covered by specific measures, you still have to take the labeling requirements of the GPSR into consideration. And you can find this in other obligations of producers. Again, it's very similar to the EU counterpart. And they do mention that consumers must be informed of the risks that a product might pose. Again, this is not a substitute for ensuring maximum safety. Maybe maximum is not the right term, but reasonable safety. It's a complement, but warning labels cannot be applied as instead of ensuring that the product is safe. But anyway, they do mention this here. And they do mention warnings. Other things they mention is product and packaging labeling, which must include the name and address of the producer, and product reference or mention of the batch of products. Again, this also comes back to traceability. So yeah, company name, contact point, address, product model, SKU, and also a batch number to facilitate recall if that would be needed. So all in all, this is just, I'm not saying that we're covering every single labeling requirement that exists in the UK. That would take a lot more time than we have for this video, but I hope this gave you at least a fairly clear idea of various types of labeling requirements that apply to consumer products in the UK. If you have questions, you can write a comment on YouTube, or you can scroll down and do the same thing on compliancegate.com.